Started?
We're good.
Okay. All right. So so first of all, welcome everybody. Thanks for coming. We're going to talk about the book of Job. I'll read something that I wrote up for the book of Job, and then what I'd like to do is each of you have a brief summary of the book of Job. I'd like to just go around and have each person just read, a paragraph or two, and we'll cover. This is for me, this is the best synopsis that I've found of sort of the book of Job without having to go read the whole thing. But I'm going to talk a little bit because there's things that I think I want to point out before we actually read the story, so that you'll be thinking about it while we read the story. So the book of Job is one of the most profound and perplexing works in all of Tanakh. And I personally have always loved the book of Job. And actually, I took a class in rabbinical school called the wisdom books. There's the wisdom books. There's the book of Job is one of them, Ecclesiastes, and the book of Ruth. So there are things called the wisdom books. But one of my professors, who was a well-known doctor in LA, Dr. Jacob Ziegelboim, wrote an entire book on the book of Job about his experience and how it related to the book of Job. It's called From Fear to Awe. And if you ever want to read a really, really interesting book, it's really interesting. He was the head of oncology at a very large hospital in LA, and then he got cancer. And he wrote about his whole story and how it in each part it relates to the book of Job, because I think we can all relate to it. So anyway, so it's, even though it's one of the most profound books in all of Tanakh, I think it's one of the most relatable books, but it's also probably one of the most complicated books in the entire Tanakh. So it opens with a righteous man, Tam v'yashar Yireh Elohim B'sar Mirah, blameless, upright, God-fearing, and distant from evil, suddenly afflicted with devastated suffering. His children die, his wealth is destroyed, his health is shattered, and his friends offer explanations that ring hollow. And in the midst of it all, Job dares to ask the most human of questions. Why? This ancient cry echoes across millennia. The book of Job does not give easy answers. Instead, it offers a sacred space to wrestle with pain and faith, to find meaning even when understanding eludes us. One of the most jarring aspects of Job's story is the silence of God during his initial suffering. Job cries out, "Why did I not perish at birth and die as I came from the womb?" He is not merely asking why bad things happen to good people. He is challenging the very fabric of divine justice. This echoes Abraham's cry in Genesis, "Shall not the judge of all earth do justice?" Yet while Abraham appeals to justice to save the innocent, Job demands justice for the righteous who suffer. The Talmud acknowledges this existential challenge. In Berachot, Moses himself asks God, "Show me your ways," to which God responds, "No man can see my face and live." The sages explain this as God saying, "You can see my back, but not my face," meaning that we may recognize divine justice only in hindsight, if at all. Midrash Tachuma expresses this tension poignantly. When the Holy One, blessed be He, sent Moses to redeem Israel, Moses asked, "Why have you done evil to this people?" Even Moses, like Job, questions divine justice when he sees suffering. Job's friends, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar, represent a classic theological response. You suffer because you sin. Eliphaz declares, "Consider now who that was innocent ever perished." But Job refuses this simplistic calculus. He knows he is blameless. The rabbis in Baba Batra even describe Job as one of the most righteous men who ever lived. Rambam, Nachmanides, in his commentary on Deuteronomy, affirms that theodicy, the justification of God's justice, is complex. While the Torah describes a system of reward and punishment, Rambam acknowledges that in Olam Hazeh, this world, the righteous may suffer and the wicked may prosper. Rabbi Joseph Soloveitchik, in his essay, Kol Dodi Dofek, writes, "The question of suffering cannot be answered intellectually. It must be confronted existentially. The response to suffering is not explanation, it is action, faith, and the redemptive power of human dignity." Job's friends offer theology without empathy, doctrine without compassion. Their failure reminds us Offering comfort must begin with presence, not answers, as it says in Pirkei Avot. Do not console your fellow while his dead lies before him. When God finally responds to Job in chapter 38, it is not with answers, but with questions. Where were you when I laid the earth's foundations? Tell me if you know so much. This whirlwind speech shifts the frame. God does not justify Job's suffering. He invites Job into the mystery of majesty of creation, of the majesty of creation. Midrash Rabbah teaches, when a mortal judges, he punishes first and speaks later. But the Holy One reverses it. He teaches first, and then, and only then, judges. Yet in Job, even the divine speech offers no verdict, perhaps because Job's suffering is not a punishment. It is a cosmic journey, a cosmic mystery. Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks of blessed memory interprets this brilliantly. God does not answer Job's question. Instead, he enlarges Job's perspective, showing him that his life, while painful, is part of a vastly intricate moral universe whose totality we cannot comprehend. Job's transformation is not intellectual, it is relational. At the end, he says, my ears had heard of you, but now my eyes have seen you. Job's redemption begins not when he understands God, but when he encounters God. Presence replaces explanation. So this echoes Exodus when God tells Moses, I have surely seen the affliction of my people. I know their sufferings. The Hebrew word yadati implies intimate knowledge. God does not just observe our suffering, he shares it. Midrash Tehillim says, in every suffering that befalls Israel, the Shekhinah suffers with them. This is the deepest comfort, that we do not suffer alone. Job's greatness lies not in his patience, but in his protest. The rabbis in Baba Batra say Job wanted to free the world from strict justice. He argued not only for himself, but for all humanity. In doing so, Job models a faith that embraces questions, a spirituality that includes struggle. The Talmud in Menachot tells us that even Moses, seeing Rabbi Akiva's fate, asked, is this the reward for Torah? And God responded, be silent. This is my decree. This is not a silencing of doubt, but an invitation to hold both pain and faith, protest and piety. In the final chapter, Job is restored, not because his questions are resolved, but because his relationship with God is renewed. As Jews, we are the children of Israel, those who wrestle with God. May we, like Job, have the courage to cry out, the humility to listen, and the faith to remain in relationship with the divine, even out of the whirlwind. Okay, so why don't we just go around and everybody can read a paragraph or two, a couple paragraphs, and we'll get through the synopsis of the story of Job, and then we'll all sort of be on the same plane.
Job was an extremely rich and successful man who lived in a land called Uz. By today's standards, he could be compared to someone like Bill Gates, unimaginably wealthy and greatly respected and admired in society for being a good man.
Job had a large family, 7 sons and 3 daughters, and he owned extensive flocks of livestock. He was blameless and upright, always careful to avoid sinning. One day, Satan visited God in heaven. God boasted to Satan about Job's goodness, and Satan challenged God, claiming that Job was only good because God had given him many blessings. Satan said that if God gave him permission to punish Job, he would certainly turn away from God and curse him. God granted Satan permission to torment Job to test Satan's claim, but he told Satan that he was not allowed to physically harm Job in the process.
In just one day, Job received 4 messages, each giving him awful news. He learned that all of his livestock, servants, and 10 children had died due to invaders and natural disasters. Crushed by the news, Job tore his clothes and shaved his head in mourning. But still, he honored and blessed God in his prayers.
Satan returned to heaven again to request permission to test Job further. God granted Satan another chance at testing Job and allowed that Satan could cause physical suffering to Job, but must not take away his life. Satan afflicted Job with agonizing, weeping, skin sores all over his body. Seeing how mercilessly he suffered, Even Job's wife encouraged him to curse God and give up and die. Job refused to turn his back on God and instead entered a struggle to accept his difficulties.
Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar, three of Job's friends, went to visit him. To support Job in his grief, they sat in silence with him for 7 days. On the seventh day, Job began to speak, and the four of them shared their thoughts about Job's afflictions. Job cursed the day he was born. Eliphaz replied that Job, who had comforted many other people, must have never really understood their pain. Eliphaz told Job that his suffering must be due to some sin he committed, and he encouraged Job to seek God's forgiveness and favor. Bildad and Zophar agreed that Job must have done evil and offended God. They urged him to resolve to live a more blameless life from now on. Bildad claimed that Job's children probably brought their deaths upon themselves. Zophar even suggested that Job may even have deserved a far greater punishment than what he had already suffered for whatever wrongs he had committed.
Job became upset at his friend's remarks. He insisted that, in spite of their accusations, he really had lived a good and blameless life in the service of God and his fellow man. He began to ponder God's relationship with man. He could not make sense of why God judged people by their actions if he could just as easily change or forgive their behavior. As he had been so badly afflicted, in spite of living an honorable life devoted to God, he was at a loss to see how humans can please God and gain his justice. God is unseen, Job said, and God's ways are beyond human understanding. Job claimed that people cannot persuade God with words. Job desperately wished for someone who could be a go-between between himself and God, or for God to end his suffering by sending him to Sheol, the deep place of the dead.
Job's friends were offended that he ignored and criticized their advice. Believing that Job was not being honest about his wicked actions, they stressed to him that nothing good could come of wickedness and accused him of not being God-fearing enough. Job responded by telling them that he believed there would be a witness or redeemer in heaven who would know that he was indeed an innocent man. Distraught, Job became agitated and afraid. He lamented God's injustice, how God let wicked people prosper while innocent people suffered. Job wanted to confront God and complain, but he was unable to physically find God to do this. He felt that wisdom was hidden from humans, but he decided to persist in searching for wisdom by fearing God and avoiding evil.
Without prompting, another friend of Job's, a young man named Elihu, joined the discussion. He too assumed that Job must have done wicked things to deserve his afflictions. He saw Job's lengthy speech and questioning as being rebellious against God. He asserted that Job has spent too much time vindicating himself rather than God. Elihu explained that God communicates with humans through visions and physical pain. He said that nothing physical, that though through physical suffering, humans can experience God's love and forgiveness. Elihu concluded that when Job recovers, he would understand that God had saved him from death.
Finally, from a whirlwind, God himself interrupted the conversation. God demanded Job to be brave and give answers to his questions. God's questions were rhetorical, aimed at showing Job how little he knew about creation and God's power. God described many detailed aspects to show the extent of and power of his creation, praising especially his creation of and control over two large and frightening beasts, the behemoth and the leviathan, sometimes thought to be the hippopotamus and the crocodile, or mythical creatures. These beasts are said to represent the disorder and chaos that can be found in God's world. Overwhelmed and humbled by the encounter with God, Job acknowledged God's unlimited power and admitted that our human knowledge is very limited. God was pleased with Job's response, but was upset with Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar for the poor reasoning and advice. Job stood up for his friends, and God gave him and forgave him. God restored Job to good health, gave him twice as much property as before, new children, and very long life. He lived 140 more years and saw 4 generations of grandchildren.
How many of you guys have actually read the book of Job? If you haven't, it's one of the most fascinating books of the Tanakh, I think. I mean, I love the book of Job, and I think there's great things to be learned in the book of Job. So let's start off.
Can I say something?
Yeah.
There's something that's always bothered me, is right here at the very end, where he gets new children.
Right.
That has always been a
Yeah.
problem for me.
Right.
Do you have anything to say on that?
Well, I mean, look, I think that
10 children are dead.
yeah, so I think that you know, that the moral of the story is that God restores and gives Job even more than he had before, and so he gives him new children to have many, many grandchildren, so that Job can have many, many grandchildren. So, you know,
But
yeah,
as a parent, you know,
Sure.
you love the 10 children you had.
Yeah.
Those children never got to
Mhm.
enjoy their lives.
yeah. Yeah, I don't disagree with that. I mean, I don't know that there's any great explanation to that. I just think that you know, this is what was restored to Job, and the point of it is more about, you know, the relationship that Job goes throughout the entire story. So,
Can I follow up with what Phyllis was saying? Because when we think of children, we think of them as innocent. There's a prayer about the Holocaust during Passover. We call them the blameless and pure.
yeah,
So God allowed Satan to kill innocent, blameless, and pure children.
Not necessarily.
Okay,
So when the text says his children, it's not talking necessarily about little kids.
Mhm.
See, the children could be adults,
yeah, they were adult children, actually. Yeah,
okay,
And-
all right, I'm good.
and this is part of why he needs a long enough life to have grandchildren.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because his adult children are the ones that perish.
and go ahead.
I was gonna say too, since you mentioned the Holocaust, it's the same question as people said, you know, and I've been to Poland, been to Birkenau, saw those places where people were housed 500 in a building, stuck in very horrible conditions, and they're like, why me? And they've written books.
Yeah.
The book that I think of is Frankel's Man's Search for Meaning.
Yeah, of course.
And you always wonder, why am I suffering? You know, the Holocaust is the same sort of thing. Like, why did that happen to us? Like, you know, so.
It's a question I get asked a lot, actually, you know, why did God allow the Holocaust to happen? And I think, you know, there's a couple of good books in this area that are interesting. So Harold Kushner writes a book called when bad things happen to good people, which is an interesting book on that. I would also encourage you to, you know, to read From Fear to Awe by Dr. Jacob Diggleboim. But let's talk about, you know, why does God allow good people or the righteous to suffer, as is illustrated in the story of the book of Job?
Test.
Say more.
If everything just went along,
Mhm.
one might think that it was their own doing as opposed to additional and or intervention, and give them a further reason to believe.
And to expand on that, I think that maybe the purpose of suffering is to just seek God. It's maybe a tool for us to
Yeah.
seek him out.
Why does God test us?
Well, I want to go back to your first question.
Okay,
My answer is because, and I got it from a friend, actually, who was a Baptist preacher, and we were paramedics together before he was a preacher. He was interested in learning Hebrew text, Hebrew, because he wanted to be more well-rounded. His son died of cancer at the age of 6 or 7, after a terrible ordeal. One of his parishioners said to him, "Well, preacher, do you still believe that everything God does for a purpose and God hears all prayers?" His reply was, "Yeah, I still do. God hears all prayers, and sometimes the answer is no." And the person said, "So why is that?" And his answer was, "God is not a gumball machine." So this is a theology that goes against the grain of most of the ancient world, which is that everything works on an exchange basis. Everything is transactional. The ancient idolaters believe that, if you only give enough, you get everything back in return. And this is a part of a polemic against that kind of theology, which was probably at the time this was being composed. We were influenced by the people who surround us. That's creeping idolatry. God is not a gumball machine, put it in modern terms.
yeah, no, I understand, I totally get that. I totally understand that. So, we know that people suffer sometimes, right? I'm sure, and if anyone wants to speak about their own experience of this, they're suffering in a situation, feel free to do so. But, why is it that, first of all, do we believe that God tests us? Do you believe that God tests us?
We have Stephanie Sterling has
Oh.
a hand up. Steph, is
Hi,
that
Stephanie.
intentional?
Yes, that was intentional. Um, I mean, speaking from my own experience, what may in the moment seem just horrific, and I mean that you are somehow being punished, you gain so much more in the long run. Like for myself, I am a much more compassionate person. I'm a much more patient person now. I mean, that quote unquote suffering, it kind of helps to perfect you as a person, so to speak, that looking for that higher self, it's not about the moment, it's about the big picture.
I totally relate to that, Stephanie, and I think that you bring up an excellent point. You know, does anyone else want to talk about something that they feel like they were tested by God and the outcome of it? So we all agree that God does test us sometimes, right? Is that universal to everybody?
I don't know. I don't know that it's God that tests us. I think human beings test us. I think God has created potentiality, and that human beings have agency. And it's like my reaction on the Holocaust is that God didn't fail us; humanity did.
Mhm.
And that's how I believe about how all the man-made atrocities that occur throughout history. And so, no, I don't believe that God individually tests us. I don't try to dissuade anybody who does believe that, but it's just I don't relate to that.
I think it implies some hubris if you're thinking that God is testing a specific person, like versus, this is can be seen as a parable about one person, or it can be seen as you kind of mentioned before, that people can face challenges and go through tremendous suffering. Whether you want to blame that on God is up to you. It could, there could be any number of reasons why someone is going through this, and maybe you can read these texts as a comfort that there can be good stuff that happens afterward, or yes, other people have gone through suffering and we can
Yeah.
heal and move on from it.
So yeah, I think that's a good point. Did you have something, Jeff?
Yeah, it's kind of unrelated, but we focus a lot here on Job and his suffering, but there's this whole other interplay going on between God and Satan,
Right,
Right.
absolutely.
which
We'll
is
talk
really
about that too.
fascinating.
Yeah.
I was hoping.
Yeah, we'll talk about that too. But it's interesting, going back to the testing thing, and then we can go to the whole interplay between God and Satan and that whole piece. I personally do believe that God tests us. I believe that, I've had many tests in my life personally, and I wrote a whole Dvar Torah for my congregation that I gave maybe a year ago, about God testing us. And one of the things that I say in there, that when I talk to people, is that I believe that God tests us because He loves us, because we grow from that. Like we gain so much more, as Stephanie was alluding to. We gain so much more when we're challenged, when we're tested, right? We know as a doctor of psychology, and somebody who's counseled many people over the years, that we grow through pain, and in that, that the aftermath of the pain is growth, and that people don't change. My experience has shown me, and the research would back this up, that people don't change until the pain gets great enough. And everybody's pain threshold is different. And you can look at addiction as one of those issues, right? That people don't get sober or don't change their ways in alcoholism and drug addiction until the pain gets great enough, and until they've suffered enough. And then when the pain gets great enough, they go one of two ways. A lot of times people continue to go on with addiction, and a lot of those people unfortunately die. And some people stop and will make changes in their life and go on and get sober. Go ahead.
So, I think people also change for positive reasons. I don't think only pain causes people to change. One example is parents. When you have children, it changes you, you change.
Oh yeah.
So change can happen for many different reasons. It doesn't only have to.
No, but I think, but I do think that when people experience enough pain, they'll change. That's one of the because it's very hard for people in general to change. I can tell you from working with lots of clients over the years that people don't change just because they think it's a good thing. Most of the time, it's seldom that I come across situations where people decide they want to change because everything's going great in their life.
I think there are people who do change when faced with adversity, but I also think there are people who maladapt from adversity, that become bitter and hateful and scornful and become worse human beings, vindictive, and lash out. And so I don't subscribe to the idea that pain is the doorway to becoming a more just, kind, and humane person. If somebody does it, that's an amazing transcendence, and I have nothing but respect for them for doing it. But so many people, when they encounter painful things in their lives, they become harsher and worse human beings.
Yet some overcome, and like Viktor Frankl, who experienced the Holocaust, writes this book of encouragement, of hope, of transcendence, and it could go the other way too.
That's right. That's all I'm saying, is that it's not a, God is blessing us with pain. I just, like, as I said, I reject that kind of theology personally.
I
Yeah,
don't
well,
think it's so much God's blessing us with pain as much as God's teaching us through pain.
We have an opportunity on everything, whether good or bad, to try to learn from it.
so I agree with that. One of the things that my spiritual psychology professor used to talk about, which I believe wholeheartedly, is that he used to say all the time that the issue itself.
Yeah.
What is that noise?
Oh, I think this is a car.
Oh, that the issue itself is never the issue. How I view the issue is the issue.
Right.
And so
How
I
you
can
react to it.
so I can look at an issue and be like, I can tell you from living in a homeless shelter for 10 months that there were lots of other people in that homeless shelter with me. And, I chose to view it one way. I chose to view it as like, it was the first step in an entirely brand new journey that could take me to places unknown. Now, I didn't get there on the first day I entered the homeless shelter. I can tell you that. And like, I actually, on my knees one night in a homeless shelter, I was probably there maybe 30 days. And I'll tell you why this came about, but I was probably there 30 days at the time. I just said, you know what, like, I said, like, what the, God, like, is this what you want my life to be? Like, is this really what I deserve? Is this where I should be?
Sound like Joe.
Yeah. And I said, like, why would you do that to me? And I thought that God must really hate me. That, I went from like, one day running the state of Indiana from, and for one of the largest companies in the world, I had a house on a lake. I drove around in a Porsche. I had like this huge office. I had like all these things that from the outside looking in, you would have thought I was like this great guy. And at the age of like 29 and 30, I was the youngest director ever hired by Chubb Insurance Group when I ran the state of Indiana for them. And all of a sudden, literally like almost overnight, now granted, it all happened through drugs and alcohol, but overnight, like I was in a homeless shelter. Like, it was like a weird deal. And I'll tell you a very quick funny story because I think it's relevant to this. So here I am, this nice Jewish kid from, Connecticut, New York, and I end up in a homeless shelter, right? Like, what am I doing there? Like, I didn't know from homeless. I don't even think I ever saw a homeless person, honestly, before I lived in this homeless shelter. And so I get to the homeless shelter and I get a roommate. Everybody gets a roommate in the homeless shelter. And I get a roommate. His name is Mario. So we live in this room. It's a tiny little room. We have single beds. They're about this far apart. Now, it turns out Mario is a Colombian drug lord. He's a cartel guy who is out on bail, awaiting trial, and his attorney thought it would be a good idea for him to be in the homeless shelter doing volunteer work while he was awaiting trial because it would look good for his trial. So now this is my roommate, Mario, the drug lord, right? Which, he smuggled, enormous amounts of drugs into the United States. So I'm living with Mario. I live with him for a couple of months, and 2 months into my living with him, he has 2 more months before he has to go to trial. So I've lived with him for 2 months. So I've worked with him in the kitchen. I've worked with him in housekeeping. I've lived with him. I slept literally like 3-4 feet away from this guy. He wakes me up in the middle of the night one night and he says, "Art, get up. I got to talk to somebody." And I'm like, "Mario, what do you got to talk about? Like, it's 3 a.m. I'm like, I want to go to sleep." He goes, "No, seriously, get up." So I sit up on the side of my bed. Mario sits up on the side of his bed. Our beds actually are so close, we can't even sit facing each other because our knees would hit. So we had to sit like with our knees next to each other. So then Mario proceeds to tell me, and he says, "You know how everyone thinks I'm going to trial for drug smuggling?" And I said, "Yeah, we kind of know your story. I've known him for a couple of months at this point." He said, "Well, that's one of the charges, but the primary charge," he tells me, "is murder." It turns out that Mario stabbed a guy to death in a drug deal that went bad. He stabbed a guy 20 times in a drug deal that went bad. Now, I don't know about you, but when somebody tells me they stabbed somebody to death, I don't even know what to say to this guy. But, like now I got to live with him for 2 more months. Then he says to me, "But you can't tell anybody because nobody knows. Only one who knows is my attorney and now you."
Sleeping with one eye open for
Right.
the rest of the time.
So I can tell you, like, that was a changing moment in my life. When after he told me that, I was so freaked out, first of all. I don't even know, what do you say? "Oh, that's great. Let's play spades." I don't know. What do you say? What do you say to a guy who just told you he stabbed somebody 20 times? And so that right after that conversation, I lied in my bed, I rolled over and I faced the wall And I just said, you know what, like, God, I need your help to make change in my life, because this is not what I'm supposed to be doing. Like, I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing, but I'm not supposed to be living with a murderer. So I had to live with murder for 2 more months after he told me that. And then he went to trial. The day he went to trial was the last time I saw him. He got 19 years in a maximum security federal prison at Stillwater, Minnesota, with a letter of deportation upon the end of his sentence. So, so like, I don't know why God was, like, I don't know why God put that situation in my path, but it changed my life, that's for sure. And I was a very different person after that, and after living in the homeless shelter, just like Job was a very different person after he had gone through what he went through.
We probably learn more through adversity than we do through success, and so there's probably some purpose in there that you grow when you suffer.
Yeah.
Probably more so than when everything is just glorious.
Yeah.
I want to go back to the concept of change. So I worked with offenders for 24 years, my job at corrections. And obviously, they had done something bad.
Yeah.
Some of them were not ready to change, but a lot of them did. COG was one. Cognitive behavioral therapy was certainly a piece of it. Treatment. Getting older, especially for young men, when they hit 30, 35, they kind of grew up. Some of them grew up when they went from 20 to 24.
Yeah.
But people, I think, are capable. I'm absolutely convinced people are capable of change. It can happen for whatever the reason you're in that situation, you can change without additional bad things happening to you. I guess is my point.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I agree with that 100%. And people can change at any time they choose to, right? They can make that choice. If that, no matter what they're going through, people can change. And I'm a perfect, not me personally, but I, when people get referred to me typically for counseling, for, my counseling practice, it's because they come to me and they say, I want to make change in my life. Like, I don't want to live like the way I'm living anymore, and help me make change. And then I help them design a life of change, where they'll do different things. And it starts, honestly, it starts in some very basic areas, but branches out into some really interesting places that I can help them go, or I can help them achieve through, guidance. And I think that's really critical.
Could I follow along what Jeff was doing?
Yeah.
I'm gonna go and look at something a little off the center here, because we have the children, we have the livestock, we have the servants who've all died. At this point, what's happened to Job is people near him, around him, and the animals and all that have been affected.
Right. Other than his wife, who's still alive.
His wife is still alive, and he is actually at this point not physically afflicted. That comes later. And I'm wondering about the incentive for change, because all of this happens to other, yes, you lose a child, that's going to affect you, not as much as the child who's gone. And so that's where I'm going on this is all of this stuff has happened externally, as opposed to internally to him specifically.
Yeah.
I don't feel like Job has changed, though. His outward presentation hasn't changed, and I thought that was somewhat also of the point. When Satan was testing him, it was to see if his faith in God would go away. And certainly emotionally he has changed. Lots of things about him have changed, but that inner part doesn't change. And I thought that was
And even his
Yeah.
wife tried to convince him,
right.
but we have free will.
Yeah.
Right.
And Job resisted that even from his own wife.
But he does maintain his faith in God and his relationship in God. And he questions, he asks God questions about why, like what's going on. And God says, to him, like, what do you really know? Like, were you around when I created the foundations of the world? Like, and God challenges him back. And so I think that, what we see is that he you know, and I'll say this a lot, this is just my own personal thing, that like today, based on all the experience I have in my life, I have an undying faith in God. Like I have an undying bond and faith and trust in God, because I have in many times in my life experienced where something will happen in my life, and I have, you know, as a human, I have tunnel vision. Like I don't see the big picture. But then like I'll be like, oh wow, like what is going on? But then like, you know, 6 months later, I'll look back and I'll say, oh yeah, that's why that had to happen. Like I look back now and say, now I know why I needed to end up in a homeless shelter, because I had to change. I needed to make changes in my life. And had I not ended up in that place, I would have never become a rabbi. Like I would have never done all of the interesting, you know, really interesting and fulfilling things I've done in my life, ultimately then becoming a rabbi. And so, you know, that was part of the change. I became a much more spiritual person as a result of addiction and of alcoholism. I never would have become a rabbi had I not become, you know, much more spiritually grounded and built a spiritual foundation. So getting back to what you're saying, say more about that.
Well, it just, you know, it just occurred to me, even as he's talking, you know, that is also part of the message in my view, or at least it was the impetus for the test, right? Could basically Satan is betting that he can break Job's will or Job's commitment to God.
Yeah, he can break his faith.
Right, and that doesn't happen. Now, I mean, I do know some people who have gone through things, and we've discussed this too, where they really did, their faith was tested. They didn't always, that doesn't mean that they completely lost it in the end, but it was definitely tested. I know, you know, when my father was toward the end of his life with cancer, he wavered, you know, this whole thought of how could a being, God, allow people that he says he loves to suffer physically, even if they've lived a pretty good life, you know, was something he questioned. I have a friend whose mother also died from cancer, and she did, you know, her mom toward the end said, no God would, who says he loves his people, would allow this to happen. Now, my dad did not go that far.
Yeah.
But, you know, I think things can happen, and it's just interesting. And there is that message here of, you know, what happened to Job was truly horrible. He lost everything except for his wife. And then you see this part where he's questioning it, and his friends are kind of basically doubting him, or trying to find a reason for it.
Yeah, they tell him he must be a sinner, that he must have committed horrible sins.
Right.
And that's why he's getting
Right.
punished.
I did think it was interesting, there was that one part of, well, clearly you must not have really been able to empathize with other people when they were suffering.
Even though he had comforted many other people.
Right. And I don't know if the broader text goes more into that, or if it's really worth, what was worth exploring. It could just be his friend being critical of him.
And I think that one of the messages in the book of Job that you know I learned from my own personal experiences is that, you know, when my professor says how I view the issue is the issue, like when something happens that I'm not comfortable with, or that I may not like, or that I feel my initial reaction might be that it's bad, you know, like for me, like as long as I have faith and I know that everything happens for a reason, and that my job is not, I really honestly don't ask why anymore. Like I know my job is to accept and to believe that God's got my best interest in mind, and that, you know, good things will come out of bad things, or good things will come out of things that I might view as bad, because I don't really see the whole picture. I don't really know, and I can give you lots of examples of that in my life, and I'm sure every one of you have examples of that, where later on you see why it had to happen and what the good was that came out of it. There's an interesting book that,
I'm sorry, I've had things that I see no good coming out of. I think this is actually teaching us the opposite. I think this is teaching us that there are things that happen that we don't have an explanation for, but that does not negate that God created.
right, and it doesn't mean that we should lose faith in God as well. I agree with that. Have you had things happen that you have seen good come out of, that things that you didn't necessarily, that you thought were bad or didn't like?
Sure, but I'm talking about some really catastrophic things that, no, good did not come out of, okay? And it was a challenge not to become embittered by those things. But, this is, you mentioned parable. I think Job is Midrash. I think, start out with this land of Uz.
Land of Uz, yeah.
Which didn't exist in the ancient world. I think that's preamble that tells you this is a midrash. It's a story about that human beings cannot comprehend the universe, and God does not work like a compound machine. And there bad things do happen with people. You mentioned the Holocaust earlier. I think of Elie Wiesel's God on Trial, and how that ends.
Yeah.
Spoiler alert, if you haven't, if you're not aware of it, God gets convicted and then they immediately convene for prayer.
Yeah. No.
This is a rejection of the kind of idolater theology that presupposes human beings have the ability to bend the will of God and then through it control things in our lives which inherently are uncontrollable.
Yeah, I mean, I believe that. I believe that we don't have control over things in our lives. But I will say one thing, and then I'll come to you first. One of the things, look, that the Holocaust was, an incredible tragedy, right? None of us can disagree with that. However, one of the things that did come out of the Holocaust is the state of Israel. I mean, one of the reasons that we have the state of Israel today is because of what happened in the Holocaust and how that changed people's views on Jews, that Jews should have their own state. And so, there's, when you look at, some of the things that we think are horrible, there can be good that comes out of that. Go ahead, please.
I want to go in a different direction here, which is his friends. I think it's really interesting that his friends were not much comfort to him.
Right.
And I think there's also a lesson here about how do we comfort people.
Yeah. Yeah, and when we're in a situation, do we support our friends, or do we, or are we?
Do you blame the victim?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Right.
Yeah, and we see a lot of that going on in the world today. I mean, that's pretty relevant to our world that we live in today, right? Blaming the victim. It's happening way more than I'd like to talk about, quite honestly. But that is part of what's going on.
So when we talk about Job, that's almost, I don't often hear that mentioned.
Yeah.
So when Jeff mentioned this interplay between God and Satan's adversary, just means adversary. And this is the same Satan that stood in front of Balaam's ass and ended up causing, and that was sent by God.
Right.
And so I think it's important that we think about that when we see this word here, we don't create the image that's created by Western Christendom or Islam, but rather within our own tradition, that this simply, God boasted to adversary about Job's goodness. Adversary challenged God, claiming Job was good only because God had given him many blessings. You know, that reads very different than if you're thinking about Satan in the general Western civilization tradition.
Right, that's true. That's totally true.
But it's almost like that same struggle is going on at a higher level between God and Satan, or God and the adversary. The Job's having down here, same kind of struggle,
Yeah.
so.
Yeah.
God boasted, you know, what was that all about? I mean, why would you do that? But, and why would you welcome this adversary to come visit you?
Who God created.
Right, right, that's true, that's totally true. Yeah, that's totally true. We're getting to, it's 7:26, and I don't wanna necessarily keep us any longer than we originally planned for, 7:27 now. What would you guys like to say in conclusion about the book of Job? It's a pretty interesting, I mean, look, the minimum we could say is that it's a pretty interesting and thought-provoking part of the Tanakh. At least for me it is.
Maybe just go around the table.
Yeah. Go ahead, Zeb, you're up.
I've got nothing more to say. It's all very interesting that the tests that occur and how we perceive them ourselves are indicative of, you know, what is to come.
Right.
I think I've said everything I wanted to say.
Okay. Eric? I love your earrings, by the way.
Little earrings.
Genius.
I loved it.
I think it's very relatable because in our life, we have struggles and we have really good times. And when we have struggles, it seems like, you know, why is this happening? When we have good times, we're also that way. Why do I deserve all this? But we get up each morning and we continue on.
Yeah.
And it's each morning's like a whole new
day.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, I think in our discussion, we're bringing in our own personal views about how we envision God in our world.
Yeah.
If he is an active, like a doer, or a more of a presence. Also was just thinking, there's this children's book by Isaac Bashevis Singer that I used to read to Noah when he was younger, called Mazel and Shlemazel. And I think I'm sure it was pretty much inspired by this, but it's very much, it is like there's Mazel, he's the one who builds people up, and Shlemazel does the opposite. And they pick someone basically to kind of show who can have a greater influence over this one person's life. So it was interesting.
Yeah.
I think the lesson here is really good. One of the things I'm always, I don't know where it's thrown, but makes me stop and think is how we ascribe human qualities to God. God's all knowing. Satan can say whatever the heck he wants. God already knows Job is faithful and that Job won't respond. He already knows that. Why? You know, God's boasting and God's, you know, he's allowing Satan to go, I'm challenging you. Well, when Job challenges him, God basically says, yeah, no, you know, not going to happen. So, but Satan can do it. And God was like, yeah, let's do that. That sounds like fun. I don't, there's the human qualities that we ascribe to God don't quite work, you know, and that's one of, this is just one example. We have that everywhere.
Yeah.
I mean, it continues through. God is angry. That's a human emotion.
Right.
That's not, I mean, God is angry. God, I mean, how, it's a human thing.
Yeah.
That's not a God thing.
I agree.
So anyway, topic for another day.
So two thoughts. One is, this is the universal question. Why do bad things happen to good people? And I don't know that we'll ever have an answer to that. I don't think there is one answer. I'm not sure there's any answer. The other thing is, what is a bad thing? Somebody loses their job. That's a bad thing.
But it might be a good thing.
Maybe
could be
better
good.
ones are coming.
Exactly.
It could be a lot of different things. I mean, some things are clearly bad. There's no question about it. But sometimes bad is relative.
I tend to look at the all biblical text in a certain sense as being a Rorschach test. You know, the ink blot. What do you see in this? Right. And it tells us more about ourselves than anything. And I think thousands of years before there were those ink blots, there was the book of Job. And it caused people, as it does today, to wrestle with the incomprehensible, which is one of the divine names, actually. You know, when Dave was talking about anthropomorphizing God, my favorite is it occurs in Torah every time it says God repents or repented, or when you get to it gets translated I am that I am, Ea Asher Ea, that as I understand it is I am becoming that I am becoming, or I have become what I am becoming. You know, we don't get to put God in a box. It's the reason why we don't pronounce the Tetragrammaton. We don't try to, because you know, this is like inherently we don't understand, and I think Job is the big attempt to try to explain to ourselves and maybe to others that we can't understand it all. Yeah, it's a good decision. Yeah.
Anyone on Zoom want to comment? Any takers?
This has been interesting.
Want to go a little more, Sherry?
No.
Okay. All right, no pressure.
Steph?
You know, I think Job is one of those unique books that it fits whatever you need it to fit at that point in your life. You know, you're going to get something slightly different out of it every single time you go through it because you're not the same person you were the day before. And it helps us look inside ourselves a little bit more. That's what I get from it.
Every time I read it, because I read it every year over and over again, I always get something new out of it. When I read it just last year, and that is like, where are you in life? And oh, I see something I didn't see before.
So just in conclusion, I would say one of the beauties I think of the book of Job is that I think no matter what your stance is on the book of Job, I think everyone can relate to it in some way or another, and it brings up a lot of questions that we have to ask ourselves and that we can ask each other. And the big one is, you know, the question of why, you know, and so I think that it just is such a profound book in the Tanakh, and to me, it's, you know, I've read it numerous times, and it's just I learn new things all the time from it, and I can you know, I can always learn more and more from reading it. Every time I read it, or every time I have ever had a discussion about the book of Job like this, I learn, you know, much more about myself and about others, about
ask George if George has anything to say.
Good as no.
All right. Okay, well, thanks, everybody. Thanks for coming. Thanks for the discussion. You taught me a lot.
Well, let's talk about the Havdalah service. Do you want to move it to the sanctuary for that?
It's up to you, wherever you want to do it from.
We can do it right in here.
Yeah, we can do it right here. Yeah,
We have to get out the Havdalah set.
I know where some of that stuff is.
Okay. I'll go let Dale know to come in.
You know,
Got ton of those candles.
I think the candles are in here.
okay, well,
It's not-
I know where I hid them
And
years ago, and I'm wondering if they're still there.
Probably are.
And if anybody wants to, like, follow along with the prayers, Havdalah's in the prayer book. Okay.
Hi.
I'll go get a couple copies.
oh, how are you?
We made it.
Yeah,
What's going on?
we just finished talking. So good time.
How was the game? Did they win?
Took a win, yeah. I mean, not Army. Army's right now battling back the end of their game.
Wyoming
Cowboy won.
31-7.
Wow.
That's Northern Iowa.
Okay.
Should have won, but we looked good.
Okay. I was gonna say, was this like not a challenging team or equally matched team? Or?
No, they're good. I mean,
Yeah, they're good.
they're
We
good.
just,
We-
our
we
defense played
well.
really
They
well.
had 2
And Army just
interceptions,
went ahead of
blocked
Kansas
punt.
State, and then Kansas State ran back the kickoff. So now they're down by 7.
Okay. Oh, wow. You win some.
No, it's not over yet. It's not over yet. But I didn't think that they'd even be that close to it.
Oh, I could have helped. Oh, so sorry.
I get retired. You don't have to anymore.
Anything for an excuse to work out.
Let's
Yeah,
go.
exactly. There you go.
Well, you still can be part of the gym.
Yeah. I started doing exercise, serious exercise for the first time when I retired. Before that, I'd never really done, going for walks, bike rides and stuff, but not anything organized. I actually joined the gym.
Right, well, and I've been doing it for what, 10, 15 years now, so.
The gym, did you go back to Planet Fitness?
I was in Planet Fitness. I
Yeah.
stopped that because I started doing the virtual reality stuff. That's just more fun, and I can do it from home.
Yeah.
I don't have to go to the gym, change,
I know.
do all that stuff.
Motivation to get to the gym.
And you like going in.
I do.
Yeah. So where do you
I
go?
like using
I do
other
Planet
people's
Fitness.
equipment.
I do the barn.
The barn.
Okay. All
Yeah,
right. Yeah.
you probably get a lot of exercise in the barn.
A lot of lifting.
A lot of hay, a lot of feed,
And a lot of food.
A lot of poop.
couple 100 pounds a week,
Oh my
and you're out half the day.
goodness. Okay,
Well, they eat
they eat a
over
lot.
They
yeah,
do. That's all
40
they
to
do.
50 pounds a day.
Yeah. Oh, gosh.
You're pissed at them.
I know. They're looking for us to get them
They
in
want dinner.
for dinner and for
Right.
bed. They're going, where are they?
That's funny.
They're just so used to it. They pretty much bring themselves in.
Oh, yeah.
And the times change. By winter, they're in by 3:30
Really?
and summer
Because it gets
6:30.
dark.
Yeah.
Right, they're
That's
sensing,
dark.
they're
They
going
really
by
do
the
sense
way
it.
of the
I
sun.
know.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, which makes perfect sense.
yeah.
Sure
And
does.
there are pets, they're not just wild horses. You know, we bring them in and they know it, and they
Right.
get brushed down, and
I think,
fed and treated.
I think pets kind of thrive on routine because they're trying to figure out how to live with us, right? Yeah, humans too. Children especially.
That's the wine. There's the pretty candle.
The
Matches, we
spice
got
box.
spice box.
All right.
So does everybody know what all of the symbols of dollar represent? Right, so we have a cup of wine for the sweetness of Shabbat. for the sweetness of the week, right? We have a spice box, which can be viewed a couple different ways, but one way is to, that when we smell the spices, to awaken us for the upcoming week, to raise our senses. We have a braided candle, which is, you know, you can look at it as the first light of the week to come, and that we, you know, it's also that we look at the light and the shadows in our palm to look at the separation that God gives us between day and night, dark and light. So we have all the symbols of Havdalah. I'm gonna do something a little different. Since you guys have heard me for days here, I think that we'll add a little ambiance to Havdalah, which I don't have the talent to bring. So we're gonna let somebody else help us bring that to our Havdalah service.
I have a quick question. Why a braided candle?
It's a great question. I think because it increases the amount of light, so it gives us more light, and we can see the shadows for the separation of dark and night better with the braided candle. Yeah. Okay. All right. So, does someone wanna? Do you want to light the candle and hold on to it for now? We're going to lift the wine, but we're not going to drink the wine. And we're going to start on page 306. And the person who's going to come on here is going to start 1, 2, 3, 4 lines from the bottom. We usually start when there's 3 stars in the sky, but we'll make a little exception here. Now we're on page 308, and please sing along with this.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei keri hagafen borei keri hagafen amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei b'nei Mitzrayim Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei ha'esh borei ha'esh. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam Kodesh lecho kekor v'kodesh Yisrael b'yom hashvi'i v'sheshet yomim v'maseh Baruch atah Adonai Hamavir bin kodesh lecho
Ruato. Pause for a second here. Is this grape juice or wine?
Grape juice.
It is grape juice? Okay. Candle up in there. Vuatov, and then on page 311. Eliyahu Hanavi, Eliyahu Hanavi, Eliyahu, Eliyahu, Eliyahu Hagiladi, Imira Yameinu, Yahweh, Imoshiach ben David, Imoshiach ben David, Eliyahu Hanavi, Eliyahu Hatishbi, Eliyahu, Eliyahu, Eliyahu Hagiladi. Beautiful. Okay. Shabbat shalom. Everybody. It's all over.
Shavua tov.
On to the next.
Shavua tov.
Okay.